Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Good morning to some of you, depending on where you are. Thanks for joining us. I'm Fanae Croft. I'm the Field Marketing Manager here at the Graduate Management and Mission Council. And today we're going to be talking about financing the MBA. Often we're going to talk about the GMAT exam or how you prepare for it. But one of the major draws to B schools are the opportunities to change your careers, advance your careers, tap into those networks, and the conversation around cost for school can sometimes be intimidating. The average salary of an MBA grad is about $105K, whereas if you attend a top program, that could be upwards of $200K. And on the flip side, according to U.S. News and World Report, in 2017, the average cost of the top 10 business school programs was over $130,000 for tuition in a 2-year program. So while I and many others believe in the investment of an MBA, the sticker cost can sometimes be shocking, and people want to figure out, is this something that I can really handle? What's the ROI? So today we're going to be talking to experts who's going to give us some insight on how to approach financing the degree. You want to do it, you want to change that career, you want to get that great salary, but you also want to be smart about how you approach this. And you want to think outside the box to make sure this is something that you can handle, or to even open up opportunities for you that maybe you thought weren't there or available to you. So before we get into that, just want to make a few housekeeping notes. We're going to get to as many questions as we can. I know there are a lot of you out here on this call today. So we're going to chat for about 20 to 40 minutes, depending on how the conversation goes. But as you have questions, make sure you just post them to the comment section. We'll be making sure we're checking those, and we'll address those once we have our initial discussion. Secondly, I want to mention that we do a monthly survey. If you go to www.mba.com/surveys. You can fill out our candidate survey for an opportunity to win either a $50 GMAT exam voucher or a $50 Amazon gift card. It takes 2 seconds. So if, while I'm talking right now, you want us to pop over and do it, you can be done in a second. There's that. I think that's all I have to say. So what I want to do is circle back to my guest today. I have Ann Richards on. She's the Senior Associate Director of Admissions and Financial Aid at Cornell University. And Anthony Pena, he's the Manager of Recruitment at Villanova. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
Good. So happy to have you. This is a very important conversation. It impacts people no matter where you are in the journey, if you're just thinking about business school or if you've actually submitted your application and you're thinking this thing through. So I'd love to get some insight from both of you on, if you were looking to financially prepare for this journey, like what are the first things that you might want to think about? Ann, will you start us off?
Sure. I think, thinking about this in advance is so smart, because it gives you a window of time in which you can get your house in order and you can prepare. I would say if you're thinking about an MBA, there are a couple steps that I would recommend that you start with. One is get your financial house in order. Make sure you know what you owe, get your credit cards together, figure out how much money you owe to whom, look at your other debt, like perhaps a mortgage or a car payment or some other financial obligations, so that you have a sense of how much money you owe. Then make sure everything is current, up to date, and work on maintaining that good credit history. Don't pay any bills late. Don't take on any new debt. Don't open any new lines of credit. And then the other thing that I would really recommend is to put yourself on a budget. Once you know how much you owe and what your monthly obligations are, put yourself on a budget so you know where the money that's coming in is actually going to. And once you do that, you can hopefully set aside some money to save for your education.
Thanks, Ann. Often, I I think that's the part that's just not thought about. It's like, well, can I get a scholarship? What kind of financial aid is available? And the thought really doesn't go beyond that point. But I think that's great for people who are maybe a few years out to start just getting those ducks in order, seeing where you can cut costs, save right now. Anthony, what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, no, I would agree with everything that Ann just said. And just think about it. This is like any other big investment you have thought about at this point in your personal life. So a car, a house, you want to have some personal resources to bring to the table, right? So start saving. I was very impressed to see so many people interested in this topic because I think you're thinking about it early on in the process for most of you who are kind of just starting to think about that. And I think you do think about the application, you think about the process and where to go to school. And I think how to pay for it is just as important. So I think savings is huge and something a lot of people don't do before business school. And then they get admitted and then they start to wonder, how am I going to pay for this, right? And so you definitely want to save, get your investments in order. Definitely know what you owe. Think about your undergraduate debt. Have you paid that off yet? Will you continue to pay that off? There are some deferment options, right? You really want to know what your different options are when going into this. Kind of always thinking about it, I may not get a scholarship, right? So how am I going to pay for this if there isn't money available from the schools that I apply to? I think that's really important to keep in mind. And then if you get that scholarship, it's always like an added benefit and just eases the kind of burden of what you would owe to the school once you get admitted into the program.
I really want to second what Anthony just said, that very often there will be school resources that will help you out, but that should be the bonus. And if you're prepared financially, if you're in a position to borrow attractive rates, student loans, if you do get scholarship, then the amount that you've saved or the way that you prepared is not going to hurt you. That will just be a bonus because this is, I think Fanae mentioned it at the beginning, this is a great investment. And we don't want to scare you with thinking that, oh, this is hard. I have to put myself on a budget or I have to think about how much money I owe. It really is. You're just preparing yourself to really be successful in this endeavor and to be able to choose the program that's right for you.
Anthony, what type of considerations should they start making once they're in the application process?
Yeah, I think before you start applying to schools, I think some things you should start to think about is what type of program do you want to be in, right? I mean, I think if you're going to go the full-time direction where you are going to give up your career, give up 2 years of salary, those programs, there might be some living expenses, new or costs to move to wherever you're going to school. I think that's one thing to think about. Are you interested in kind of going part-time, right? Keeping the career that you have a steady salary coming in while also doing it part-time. There's a lot of really good part-time programs where you can still finish the degree in a 2-year time frame like you would in a full-time program or an executive level, right? Sometimes those programs tend to be a little bit more expensive than a part-time program, but they can sometimes be on the weekends and they just free up the schedule and things like that. And so I think kind of determining what type of program will help you figure out where do you want to apply, because for most people part-time, unless you're going online, we'll be looking at more local schools, where full-time it kind of expands. Do you want to go in the US? Do you want to go outside of the US? Where in the US would you like to go to school? And so I think narrowing some of those things down, I always say you want to kind of look at a lot of schools at first and then maybe narrow it down to maybe 3 to 6 schools that you actually want to apply to. And from there, figure that piece out. But I think that will help you kind of understand what the expense will be from your end and will you have any income coming in when thinking about going back to school.
Any thoughts, Ann?
Yeah, I think those are great suggestions, and that's a great way to start that whole application process. Once you've sort of narrowed down or focused on the types of programs and the schools you want to apply to, don't expect the school to pay everything. Be proactive about how you can help finance this yourself and position yourself so that the school will want to give you some money. So initially, helping yourself, look for private scholarships and outside scholarships. And you should do that before you get admitted to a program. Early in the process is when you're going to want to begin that outside scholarship search. right now is not too early to start to search for scholarships. There is money out there for MBA study. There is money out there that you can use for MBA study. It may not be targeted specifically for MBA applicants, but it may be because you were the child of a firefighter or a police officer or a teacher, and you may qualify for some money. If you can get 3 or 4 $5,000 scholarships, that's a nice chunk of change. There's $20,000 that you can use towards your education. And that money is what I call portable. You can take that money anywhere to any school that you're going to. So search for outside scholarships. The second thing is position yourself so that a school will want to give you money. So you've begun to narrow down who you want to apply to or the types of schools that you're looking for. Do a little homework on how they award their scholarship or what they look for in awarding scholarship. For many MBA programs, it's merit, and the school defines merit, but generally speaking, that's probably academic performance and test scores. Those are certainly components. They may not be the only components, but those are components. So I'm going to make a pitch to take your GMAT early. Take it early and often if you have to. So don't hesitate to take the test again if you feel you can improve your score, because very often a higher test score is one of the things that schools look for in awarding scholarship. Probably not much you can do about your past academic history, but if you feel that there are some areas that could use some improvement in your academic background, take a course. Supplemental courses, take them for grades and get good grades, and make sure you include that on your application information. And then finally, many schools like to see civic engagement or community involvement. Think about how you've been engaged in your community, however you define your community. That can be certainly your work community, your social community, your geographic community. And think about ways that you specifically have gotten involved and had an impact. So maybe it was your idea to have a more of an inclusive club, or lobby your employer to be more inclusive, or develop something like a lactation room or something that benefits others larger than yourself. You want to make sure that you highlight that for your application. And that can help position you to be more meritorious when the school looks at you.
And the one thing that I just wanted to add in is, as you're starting to think about applying, start having some conversations with your employer as well, right? If you're thinking about a part-time program and you're going to kind of stick with that company, or you're willing to maybe go back for a certain amount of time, sometimes it could be 3 years, 4 years, depending on your company. But if they can help kind of take some of that financial burden off of you, it's a good resource. So if you enjoy the company you're working for, you're maybe not looking to make as big of a career change using the MBA at this stage, tap into your employer resources. A lot of them will offer kind of a standard 50, 250, but some will even go as far as paying for maybe half, or the full tuition and fees for the MBA if you're willing to maybe go back post-business school as well. So keep that in mind. It's good to start those conversations early to see what the support is and how the MBA can benefit the company as well.
Anthony, I'm glad you brought that up because that is a great resource. According to our recent corporate recruiter survey, 61% of U.S. employers offer tuition support. Now, it's a much smaller percentage take advantage of it, or at least show those types of funds when they're going into their programs. But over 20% of full-time MBA graduates receive financial support from their employers. And then when you look at the part-time side, 62% of those graduates of those part-time programs receive funding. So if you look at the average amounts, they're about somewhere around $20,000. if you just lump all students in. So it's a great resource to take advantage of if you haven't. Once they're in school, what should they be thinking about?
I would say, I'll jump in here, controlling your costs. You know, when you first start school, it's really tempting to join every single club and do every single thing. And, you know, just buy all the sweatshirts, baseball caps, t-shirts, you name it. Think about controlling your costs. I represent a full-time program. All of our students quit their jobs, move to Ithaca, and start their MBA. Ithaca is not a major metropolitan area. Rents here are a lot cheaper than they are in New York City, Chicago, Boston, Washington, D.C., LA. And so oftentimes students will look at the rent and say, wow, for what I'm paying in New York, I can rent a 2-bedroom apartment all by myself and have a private study. Resist the urge to do that. First of all, our budget doesn't support that. But if you rent that 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate, we call that a roommate grant. That automatically cuts your living costs in half.
Mm.
I think as you're in school, think about ways to gain money, right? If you're in a full-time program, I spent before coming to Villanova some time with a full-time program here in PA, and we always hired grad assistants, or we hired students to help with interviews or reading applications. And now it won't be a full-time salary that's coming in, but it is some ways to kind of give you some pocket change as you're going through the program as well. Or look at some like assistantships or fellowships. At Villanova, we always hire for our part-time MBA, but it's kind of a full-time model, meaning that the students won't be working full-time. They'll still take their classes at night, but they'll become MBA fellows. And so what we do is we pair them up with a faculty member to do research, and we will pay for the majority of their tuition and fees, plus give them a small stipend to help offset some of the moving costs and the living expenses. And so look into options like that. Once you've kind of picked the school that you want to attend, see if there's some opportunities for you to get involved as well. And probably something we should have mentioned earlier, but when you get to business school, there's going to be a lot of cool opportunities that come your way. So start to think about it, right? Are you going to want to travel over spring break? Are you going to want to do some of these immersion courses? That's all extra money outside of the tuition and fees. And I always encourage people to take advantage of it. For a lot of students, this will probably be your last time going back to school, especially in a full-time capacity. And so it's exciting to be able to do that. But again, that kind of all adds into the layer of expenses that you're building up. And so think about that as well, right? You want to definitely make the most of your 2 years in a program. And so you really want to think about that. And so any way you can save while you're in the program to give yourself an opportunity like that is always helpful as well.
There may also be opportunities with fraternities and sororities or dormitories to act as not a chaperone, but like a house monitor that will give you free housing. I think that, you know, the thought of trying to work while attending a full-time program is crazy. If you're going to a full-time program, don't try to get a job, even a part-time job. Focus on all of the opportunities that the MBA program itself has to offer, and think of other ways that you can cut your expenses and save money. And I'm sure Anthony will agree, in every MBA program, there's always opportunities for free food. No company recruiter has a session, no club has a session without food. So, you know, you can monitor your food costs that way.
And what Ann just said, the word recruiter, it made me think about, well, I know this topic isn't really around career services, and that could be a whole nother webinar in terms of questions, but you do want to start to think about what post-MBA you would like to do as a career, right? Start to think about what some of the salaries look like, right? Because if a lot of people we wouldn't want you to go into a career that you're not passionate about, right? Just because it's a little bit of a higher salary. So if you want to go into nonprofit or the public interest, sometimes those salaries are not as high, right? So you want to start to think about that as you incur debt when you're going through some of these programs. If you don't want to work in some of the higher paying industries, again, that just kind of sets you up to think about post-business school.
Wow, great tips. Anthony, are there any misconceptions that you encounter often that you'd like to address?
I mean, there's always a few misconceptions out there, which I think is important. Don't be afraid to reach out to people like Ann and myself. We're here to help. So I think sometimes people look at admissions as a little bit of a black box and that it's got to be really difficult. It's so competitive. It is competitive, but that's a good competitive, right? And we want to be able to help you. So don't feel nervous to reach out to people. Always ask those questions because I think some people need some of that guidance as you're going into business school. I think one of the biggest ones I always talk to students about is that I'll never pay off the debt that I incur in business school, right? And you have to think a little bit bigger picture. It might not happen automatically, but talk to alumni in the program, get a sense of what careers look like 5 years, 10 years outside of that school, right? Start to understand what the return on investment is a program like this, because I think a lot of people would be surprised that if you budget and you save appropriately, it doesn't actually take you as much time to pay off the debt as I think some people think they'll be in it for the rest of their lives. They'll never be able to retire. It's one of those things that they see. And so if you go into it thinking smartly about it, you can pay it off as a little bit quicker than I think a lot of people go into it thinking.
Nice. And any misconception?
I think I see students oftentimes on the other end of the spectrum that, well, I'm going to have an MBA salary, so I can really borrow as much money as I want, and my level of debt is almost irrelevant. There are limits to the amount of money that you can borrow for your education. And even though it's money that you're borrowing and you're going to be responsible for repaying, the school does have a responsibility to set limits. And some of these are mandated by the Department of Education and federal rules and regulations, and some of them are sort of encouraged by the lender to set a budget, including tuition, room and board, books, personal expenses, that is reasonable for the school and the program. And you're not going to be able to borrow more than that. So, and keep in mind that there are a lot of expenses that go along as part of an MBA program that aren't really educationally related. So all these amazing and fantastic and exciting spring break trips that you hear about are not necessarily considered educationally related. And so you're not going to be able to borrow to do, a spring break ski trip in Colorado. Another thing that we get every year in our financial aid office is a request for a budget increase for more loan money to buy an engagement ring or to get married. That's not what education loans are for. So keep in mind that the loans are there to help make education affordable, not necessarily to support your current lifestyle.
That's an important one.
And I think it's important what Ann just said. I mean, also you have to think if you're not coming to business school single, right? You might be bringing a partner with you. You might be bringing a family. Keep that into consideration as well. I know at the school that I was at previously to Villanova, we sometimes hired partners. So because they were sometimes giving up their career as well to move to a new state or new country with their partner, there's some opportunities like that as well. So they definitely should be thinking about the investment as much as you are as well.
And if you could just give one note of financial aid advice, just wrap it all up. What do you think is most important for the candidates to know?
For me, it would be choose a program that's right for you. Choose the MBA program that will help you achieve your goals, that is a good fit for you and your personality. MBA programs, as you look at all the hundreds of different MBA programs out there, you will get a great education at every one of them. You'll be taught by fabulous faculty, but you'll have the best overall experience and you'll get the most out of the program that's the best fit for you. Resist the urge to say, well, this school gave me $5,000 more, so that's where I'm going to go. Because over the life of your career, that $5,000 is nothing. $20,000, $30,000, that's nothing over the life of your career. And if you choose the wrong school, or a school where you always think, gosh, I should have gone to this school, or I wish I had done this, that $30,000 is not worth it. So my piece of advice is prepare in advance, choose the program that's right for you, and go with it and enjoy it and make the most of it.
I love that, Anne. I think it's so difficult when you're, what do we call it? Can't see the forest for the trees. Like when you're in the midst of something, you're making the decision that's right in front of you. So sometimes that 10,000 versus 5,000 can seem so big in that moment. But I think that is excellent advice to really take that big picture approach and try and step away as much as you can. What about you, Anthony?
I would totally agree with that. I think that is great advice. I mean, I think going to business school is very different from undergrad, right? You know yourself a little bit better. You have that work experience under your belt. And so you really want to choose that school that's going to kind of give you that best experience, which will be different for every candidate that goes into this process. And then the other thing, which is something is kind of a reoccurring theme, but just do your homework, right? Prep before kind of going into this process. You don't want to kind of get to that perfect school and say, I can't do it because of X, Y, Z, right? Maybe it's the finances, it's not the scholarship, right? So again, I think if you go in without the expectation of getting a full ride. I think some people think that most schools will just give them the full ride, right? I've always been number one in undergrad or number one in my sports teams and things like that. When you get to this level, there's a lot of strong competition out there, right? And so you definitely want to do your homework ahead of time, know where the schools are that you want to apply, that you can get into, and then really kind of have an idea of what you can afford and can you afford to go to that school. So do your homework, kind of save going into it, because I think that will allow you to enjoy the experience a lot more than having to worry about how am I going to pay for this every step of the way as you're going into business school.
Great. Same theme though. Big picture. Take the step back.
Exactly.
Plan. Think about your budget. Think about your end goal. I love it. So we have a ton of questions. So, and I would imagine as we start addressing them, we'll start to get more because that'll get the minds working. So let's jump into a few of these here. And if we can answer them, we will. So I'll just throw them out here. I have a question. What is a good goal in terms of cash saving for an MBA? For example, a really expensive program. He knows that the answer wouldn't be as much as possible, but he's wondering if there's like a general or a rough estimate amount that you should shoot for as it relates to cash saving.
I'll jump in, and I would say use as a rule of thumb the same rule that you would use if you had an income coming in. So you want to have 1 to 3 months of expenses as sort of a cushion. So that would include your rent, your food, your debt, make sure that you can pay your health insurance. If you can have that 1 to 3 month cushion, I think that would be beneficial. That would be smart. And, if you can save more than that or you have more than that going in, that's great.
Yeah, I would agree. I always kind of say 10%-ish to 20% as you're thinking about the total cost of what you're going to spend. Kind of when you think about like putting a down payment on a house, you want to kind of have that savings to just kind of offset what you're going to be borrowing and having to pay in the long run. And so obviously, I think you're right. As much as possible is always good. We know that's not always realistic, especially if you've only been working for a couple of years leading up to business school. But I think a good estimate's right around 10%, if not about 20%, is a good way to think about it when going into saving.
Okay, thanks. So we have another question, and we may have addressed it. This person was just accepted into their programs today. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
And now, obviously, the question is how to pay, especially since the programs are overseas. Now, I know we addressed this to a degree during the session, but if there's just like one piece of advice we could give this person, any thoughts?
I would contact the school and say, what kind of financial aid options do I have? What do I need to do to give you all the information you need to consider me for scholarship?
And I would agree with that. One thing, it doesn't necessarily help the person asking this question, but it did remind me something we didn't mention earlier. If you really are thinking scholarship and resources from the school something that you're going to need, applying some of the earlier rounds. A lot of schools have a 3-round process. Typically, by the time you get to that third round process, there won't be as much scholarship or resources from the school. And so you may want to apply in some of the earlier rounds just to be as competitive as possible when going in, but reach out to the school. I mean, they become a good resource in terms of what loans you can take out at this stage, the types of loans you can take out and how much you need to borrow. And if you are thinking about your company, now might be a good time to have a conversation as well to see if they can help pitch in as well if you're going to stick with the company or maybe willing to go back post-business school.
Todd is asking, is there any difference in preparation if you're going into a part-time program versus an MBA program? Should you be thinking about it differently in terms of your financial preparation?
I think you should still consider saving when going into it. I do think there's a difference considering that you will have a salary coming in, so you'll at least have an understanding of monthly what you might have coming in. And so going to business school part-time just allows you to have that added income and not kind of missing out on that. But I think the savings piece, still you want to kind of go in having about 10%. Sometimes part-time programs might be a little less expensive because you already know where you're living and you have those expenses down, but those won't go away. So you're still going to be doing all of that while going to school. So it is an additional expense. But I think some of the tips that we gave earlier would still remain consistent, but it is nice to, I think, have that full-time salary coming in when you're going through school as well.
Okay. Amber's asking about advice for working part-time during business school, referring back to Ann. Ann says, don't do it, right? But it seems that both Ann and Anthony spoke about other opportunities on campus to make money, whether that's being a TA or staying at a sorority house or fraternity house. Any other thoughts besides anything you've already mentioned as it relates to, I would imagine the whole goal is making extra money while in business school.
And I mean, the one thing to think about is that summer internship. So typically between the first and second year of a full-time program, you will do a summer internship. I know some people like to work on maybe a startup idea or things like that, but keep in mind that if you are looking to make some extra money, again, it's not the same as the full-time salary, but most internships, if you're working for a corporation or a company, they would be paid internships. And so that's a good way to kind of get a little bit of savings as you move into the second year of business school as well. So think about that as you're kind of thinking about options. I would agree with what Ann said earlier. I don't necessarily know if you want to miss out on the opportunities a full-time program allows you to have by working part-time. Also, typically most schools that are full-time, you'll be in class during the day, which is when most people would be working unless you were doing something in retail or in the restaurant industry or something like that. But I think if you're going to go full-time, give it the full experience, because I think that's definitely worth the investment.
And that's a great reminder, Anthony, about the summer internship, because oftentimes there are companies that will make an offer of permanent employment after the internship, and that may come with a signing bonus or a second year award that you can use to help pay your tuition. So that's a great way to help enter into your second year.
Maybe allow you to take one of those spring break trips in the second year once you've saved a little bit of money.
Love that. So that's code word again for do your research. Yeah. So and you mentioned some scholarships earlier, like outside scholarships. And the question is, where can they find those types of scholarships? Are there any recommended websites? Yeah.
So, the tried and true one is FastWeb. And you would create a profile. It's just fastweb1word.com. And you would create a profile and it will search for scholarships that you may qualify for. Some you may not be interested in applying to, but some you may. Also, do your own research. Look at the organizations that you're connected with. If your parent belongs to a union, contact the union and find out if they have a scholarship account. If you were part of a sorority or fraternity, check with them to see if they have a scholarship award. Look at your professional organizations. There may be scholarship awards for accountants who want to pursue advanced degrees. And think about the field you want to go into, because in some cases there may be scholarships for people who want to go into consulting, who want to go into banking. There may be scholarships based on your gender. So I would do research outreach to individual organizations, national organizations. You could just search their website and then check on school websites as well. Like I know on our website, on our financial aid page, we have a list of some private scholarships that our students have gotten in the past. So that would be another resource. The one piece of advice that I have is you will never have to pay anything to apply for a scholarship. So if somebody says, oh, for $50, we'll find you, $100,000 worth of scholarships, don't fall for it. It's a scam.
And one thing is you're talking about thinking about, again, career-wise, I know I mentioned kind of the public interest or the nonprofit sector. There is some loan forgiveness out there for people who are working in some of those industries. So some of the schools will offer loan forgiveness. Some of the loan providers, after 10 years of working in that industry, might offer some loan forgiveness. So look into those options as well, because that can help make you feel more confident going into something you're more passionate about, knowing that you have some of this debt coming out of business school as well.
Great, thank you. We have so many questions. Where was I? Oh, can we give a ballpark difference? Someone is asking for the difference in total cost between like a part-time program and an executive program.
I think it varies. I mean, I think it depends. Like when you're looking at top 10, top 20 full-time programs, you're probably looking at about a $200,000 investment when everything's through. If you look at some really well-known part-time schools, they can be anywhere from $60,000 up to a little over $100,000. So I think it just kind of depends on the school, the reputation, the type of program that you're in. Like executive MBA programs, like I can just talk about Villanova. Our part-time program might be 55 or 60,000, where our executive program's about 100,000, but there's more included, right? You have hotels included because it's a weekend program. You have your books and your food and some of that. So it just kind of depends on the program. Again, understand what you're getting with that program. A lot of part-time or full-time programs, you're just paying for the tuition and fees. You're also paying for books and things like that on top of those charges. So ballpark's tough, but I think it just depends on kind of where you live, what schools you're looking at, and kind of where they fall on the spectrum of top business.
And part-time programs do provide scholarships and aid, yes?
They do. I would probably say it's not going to be as much as you would in a full-time program, but they do. It's a little bit more competitive, I think, but most schools, at least the ones that are in my area that I know and work with, do provide scholarship to part-time MBA students.
Great. Can we talk about there's a question about what kind of financial variables go into determining financial aid. So what's all looked at? Are taxes considered? Is personal savings considered? Can we shed any light there?
Well, I would say each school is unique and awards its scholarship dollars based on its own criteria. There are two general categories, though: need-based financial aid and merit-based financial aid. Need-based aid is like what you got as an undergrad. They're going to look at your income. They're going to look at your assets. They may look at your outstanding student debt or how much you had to borrow as an undergrad. For merit-based scholarships, they're going to look at achievements, accomplishments, career success, academic performance, scores, community involvement. It's a broader look at you as an applicant and a candidate. I don't know of any school that has a formula that says, well, scores are worth 10% and community involvement is worth 30% and academics is worth 50%. Generally, they look at you and your application holistically. So, your GPA may not be a 4.0, but you may have studied nuclear engineering, which is many would say a tougher major than, say, history. I was a history major. So the GPA, the raw number may not be as important as your overall performance. Some schools award scholarship just on merit. Some schools award scholarship just on financial need, and there are several schools that use a combination of need and merit to select their scholarship recipients. Schools are very transparent about what they look for. So go to their websites, and they'll say, we award our scholarships based on merit or on need. If they don't define what they look for at merit, take a look at the website. If they're talking about leadership, if they're talking about community, if they're talking about academic prowess, those are the things that they're going to look at as they award their scholarships.
And I would agree with everything that Ann just said. Scott, when it comes to scholarships, most schools won't dig into, they'll have what you self-report as your salary and things like that, but they won't have access to your bank statements and those types of things. It's typically, if it's merit, it would be your academic scores. Also understand whether or not the school will award merit or scholarships at the time of admission. Is there a separate application for it? Understanding kind of what the process is and when you need to do those types of things, because every school is unfortunately going to be a little bit different in terms of that process and how they award it. When you start to get into applying for loans and things like that, that's when you'll work with most schools' financial aid teams, which typically will have a separate person outside of the AdCom that you might have worked with during the admissions process. And they can help you with the FAFSA, the student loans. Once you start taking out private loans and things like that, that's when your credit plays a factor. And so you want to know if you'll need a cosigner, if you won't need a cosigner, those types of things. And that's kind of when you get into the nitty gritty of how much you might need to borrow in terms of funding.
And Fanae, I think you mentioned this before. If you are looking at scholarship, applying earlier is better, because no school has an unlimited scholarship budget. And we all exhaust our scholarship budgets. We spend every single penny we're allowed to. So apply earlier is better.
Yeah, agree.
Anthony, I want to go back to what you were just saying about if there is a different process for how they're going to factor in certain elements of your application. And I see a few questions about community involvement. They may have came from something we were talking about a little earlier. So the questions are around, how do you communicate about this as it relates to that resulting in some type of financial aid? Would you still say it's kind of vary school to school on how that factors in?
Yeah, I think it would vary from school to school. I think there are some interesting ways and different ways that you can kind of communicate how you're involved. The one thing I will say is, don't ever just add to your resume, oh, I just started volunteering a month ago, because you think that's what we're looking to see as an admissions committee. We want to see the passion, right? We know that most of you are busy and not everybody is going to be able to volunteer as much as they want. So really you want to include things that you're really passionate about, because it's nothing worse than kind of getting a question in an interview about the volunteer work that you've done and that you can't answer that question because you were just kind of padding the resume. But usually the resume is a good place to put it. Depending on a school's essays, sometimes you can kind of naturally fit in kind of your volunteer experience and your passion around that. And then the interview. A lot of schools will do different interviews. There's fit or behavioral or group interviews and those types of things. But sometimes you'll have the option to kind of talk to an admissions committee member about opportunities there. I know for us, we award scholarship both at the time of admission, but then if you're not awarded, we do have a separate application where you can ask to kind of be reassessed. And at Villanova, we're a mission-based school, we're an Augustinian school, but instead of looking at it in terms of religion, we look at it in terms of mission, right? Giving back and those types of things. And so we ask about the values that you have and kind of want to hear that. And we use that to help kind of make our decision sometimes on how we award scholarship as well. So it'll be a little bit different, but you do want to start thinking about that now and kind of, are you passionate? And will that kind of fit into the story you're trying to tell as you apply to these schools?
Okay. There was someone who mentioned being in the military and not having the opportunity to volunteer as much, but I think you kind of covered that with those things are understood and would be reviewed on a case-by-case basis.
And if you are a military applicant, look into, is the school a yellow ribbon school? Do they have those kinds of resources? Because there are a lot of resources out there for veterans to go back and get their MBA. And each school is a little bit different in the way that they work in terms of how you'll use your benefits. But have conversations like that. Most schools will have a veterans kind of person that's in charge of recruiting for military applicants. And so you definitely want to take that into consideration, because there is some money available for veterans as well in business school.
Okay, let's go back to, I think we're looking for a little more clarity when we started talking about paying off debt. and what could be considered quick? So with that, I guess, is there any light you can shed on typically how long it might take for students to pay off their debt? And also there's a question about ROI, like is going to a higher ranked school likely to lead to a better ROI as it relates to how much debt you're taking on and how long it's taking you to pay it back?
Wow, those are a lot of questions, but I'll sort of start with the length of time it takes to pay off your debt. That's going to vary depending on a variety of factors, but your personal attributes play a part in that. Very often there are people who are very debt averse and are going to do whatever it takes to pay off this debt. And very often their debt is paid off 2 or 3 years out of school. This doesn't happen so much anymore, but I remember years ago when the amount that students borrowed was a little bit less than it is now. We had students that would take their signing bonus from their employer and pay off their student loan debt. If you're willing to make those kinds of sacrifices to pay down your debt, it is likely that you won't have student loan debt very long, 2 or 3 years. If you take your annual bonus or salary increase and put it against your student loan debt, you could pay it off relatively quickly. There's a great blog, I think it's sort of archived now, called No More Student Debt. And it was written by a Harvard grad who had graduated with quite a bit of debt. And 3 years out, he realized he had not even made a dent in his outstanding debt. So he went on a mission to pay off his debt. I think it was like $45,000 or $50,000 in like a year or 16 months. And he got a roommate. He got 2 roommates. He rented out 2 rooms in his house. He sold a car. He sold a motorcycle. He took on a second job, including one as a pedicab driver in Houston. So there are things that you can do to pay down your debt fast. I would say, at least at our school, we have a high prepay rate. So our lenders tell us that our students prepay their loans at a much higher rate than their standard term. So the majority of our students will pay off their debt before their term is up, their loan term is up.
I would agree with those things. I think kind of taking a stab at the second part of the question in terms of return on investment, a little bit of a loaded question. It's hard to kind of really standardize what the return will look like, because I think it's going to be a little bit different for everybody. I don't necessarily think if you go to the #1 school that you'll pay your debt off faster than somebody that went to a number 20 school, because remember, employers recruit at all these schools, right? So just because you're at a top 5 school doesn't necessarily mean you'll automatically get a job at that firm that you want to work for, right? Because sometimes somebody at the top 10 school might get that job. And so you're competing with your own classmates plus everybody that's in business school at this stage. So you want to keep an eye out on kind of who's your top 10 companies that you want to work for, how realistic is that? Keep in mind also where you end up living, right? So if you live in New York City or San Francisco or London, which are some big markets where we see a lot of post-MBA students go, those cities are very expensive, right? And so if you end up in an industry like consulting where you're traveling 4 days a week, it might make sense for your home base to be someplace where it's a little bit more affordable to live, right? So you can save a little bit more money. You're traveling a lot anyway. And with that, you can maybe pay off a little bit more in your student loans that you wouldn't be paying rent or mortgage or something like that, right? And so it kind of depends. I mean, obviously, when you go to one of those top ranked schools, the network and the opportunities are there. And so I think the return happens gradually over time, but it's kind of what you make of it, right? I worked in career management for a couple of years before moving into the admission stage. And just because you're at one of these really good schools, there's not a magic job drawer where they kind of just open it up and hand it to you, right? They give you the tools to be successful and the network to be successful, but you still have to kind of gain those opportunities and get those employment jobs on your own as well.
Yeah, Anthony's comments are spot on. And another thing to consider regarding return on investment, you may go into business school thinking, oh, I'm going to be an investment banker, or I'm going to go into consulting and I'm going to make tons of money. But once you start the program, there's a whole world of career opportunities that are going to open up to you that you didn't even know existed before. And suddenly investment banking may not seem like such a great career choice for you. Or you may do your summer internship in consulting or investment banking or marketing and say, you know what, this isn't for me. And then that ROI calculation that you did through the application process isn't as important or as vital anymore. And so once again, I want to say, go with the school that is the right fit for you. Not where you think you'll get the best return on your investment, because you'll get the best return on your investment at the program that's right for you.
Thank you. I have a few questions up about loan rates. I did a stint in my former years at a lender in education financial services, but I'm sure things have changed in the last 10 years. So do you have any ideas about what the current rates are for loans, graduate loans?
There are so many variables that impact that. Your credit score, whether or not you get a cosigner, if you're domestic or international. I would say it's a range, but I don't even, I'm not in the trenches enough anymore to say exactly where that is.
Yeah, I would agree. I would lean a little bit heavier on our financial aid team to kind of have those conversations. So I wouldn't want to give wrong information on a platform like this. But I do know, look at the schools, right? Because some schools will have loan providers for international students that they'll have you work with and things like that. So they've done some of that research for you. You just kind of have to have the right conversations with the right people. Once you've gotten in, I think you can do some of that research beforehand, but that's kind of the conversations that will happen once you've chosen a school. You start to think about those next steps.
Absolutely. Going back to Anthony's point, most schools will have a list of lenders that they feel comfortable with, or they prefer, I guess you could say. And oftentimes they'll have their rates and everything posted. You can also go on to certain, just if you want a general sense, look at a major lender, look at your credit union, etc. Go in on their websites, and they'll usually have that information listed for you as well. So I'm going through the questions. We have so many. And I'm trying, I know you all have posted a lot of questions. I'm trying to address the ones that talk about financial aid or scholarships first, and then we'll get into some of the other ones later. So please bear with us. I know we only have a few minutes left. Are there any like general scholarships? I know it's a little different as we get into the graduate school space, but there's a question about if there are any very popular private scholarships or fellowships for foreign students. That's one. My second that I'll throw on there, because I'm trying to get as many questions in as possible, is if there's any specific advice for foreign students.
In terms of scholarship, I would look at Fulbright and then look at any government support that you may get from your home country. Those are the two biggest sources of funding that we get from international students studying here. I think in terms of advice for international students, apply early and don't be afraid to apply for scholarship from the school. There's not a connection between getting an admission decision and applying for aid. You can apply for aid and be admitted. They're not going to deny you because you've asked for a scholarship.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I'll just echo the government piece. for foreign students as you're coming to the U.S. for business school, look at your government, see if there's some scholarship opportunities there. There usually are some opportunities. Also, while you're doing that, also understand the visa, things like that, just how much time it will take, because I think applying earlier as an international student to U.S. business schools, sometimes we've admitted people in the second, sometimes the third round, and they just haven't been able to travel to the U.S. or get their visa in time. And so you definitely want to give yourself enough time as you'll be moving to the U.S. Typically, a lot of people for the first time if they're not already working in the U.S.
Thank you. There are questions about at what point in the application process should you apply for scholarships? Do you wait until you're accepted? Do you do it prior to? Do you wait till after you take the GMAT exam?
I think it depends on the school. So I think if they do have an application process, typically it would happen either during the application process or maybe right after as you're admitted. I know some schools will do that a little bit differently. I do think if you're applying to a school where they have a merit-based system, you're going to need that GMAT. And so typically you won't be able to apply or get a decision if you don't have the GMAT. So you would definitely want to take care of that. And that's the first thing I always tell people as they're prepping for business school. Get that out of the way, right? So if you're about a year or two away from applying, spend time now prepping for the GMAT. Give yourself enough time to take it. Give yourself enough time to take it twice if you would like. That way, once you're ready to apply to business school, you can really focus on the schools that you want to apply to, maybe visiting, going to class options, things like that. I always tell people to do it, especially if some of you are still in undergrad now and you're thinking about applying to business school within the next couple of years. Now's the time to do it, right? Because it's good for 5 years. You think like a student, your mind is already in that kind of frame. And so take the GMAT early, kind of give yourself enough time to prep for it. And then you can kind of really focus on it. And then the scholarship stuff those conversations can happen once you're admitted in the program. Because some you will know, you'll get in your admissions letter if you were awarded a scholarship. And then sometimes you might have a conversation afterwards with them.
Some schools have the scholarship question embedded as part of the application, the admissions application itself. And if it is, you should definitely, if you're interested in being considered for scholarship, definitely apply when you submit your application. Because after you're admitted, if you come back to us specifically and say, oh, I didn't apply then, but now I want to be considered for scholarship, you're going to the bottom of our list. We're going to consider those people who applied for scholarship at the time that they submitted their application.
Thank you. Is there a max number of scholarships you can accept?
I think in terms of a student coming in with scholarship, no, there's not. There may be a point where the amount of scholarship you have impacts the amount that you can borrow. And in graduate education, scholarship in excess of tuition is taxable. So although there's not a limit as to how much scholarship you can bring to a program, part of that money may be taxable.
Good to know. Thank you. Courtney is asking, and you may have missed it, this is a great reminder. Anne and Anthony are both with schools. They work in recruitment and financial aid. Anne is with Cornell University, and Anthony is with Villanova. There was some clarity on who you all were. Ann Richards and Anthony Penna. Penna or Pena?
Penna.
Penna. Great. Thank you. And I'm with GMAC. Let's see. We got 1 minute. Sorry that we didn't get to a few of your questions, but I think we covered 90% of them. Quick question we can address. There's a question about having five plus years of work experience. Is the GMAT required? And is there a waive option? That's going to vary school to school. If a school requires the GMAT, often they require it. They may have certain stipulations that might qualify you for a waiver, but there isn't a general rule of thumb, and that's going to vary school to school. So that's always a great question to ask. In closing thoughts, I feel prepared to apply for business school. So hopefully you all got something of what you need out there. I know it's intimidating, but it is manageable if you plan early. So we appreciate you for joining our session. Hopefully you got something out of it. Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you so much, Anthony. Best of luck to you all. mba.com/surveys, and stay tuned for other digital events. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, Fanai.
Appreciate it.
Welcome.